welcome. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples on their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is well and safe. I am Kim Kellaway, Head of Clients and Markets at HLB Man Judd, and on behalf of the ENFP Strategic Alliance of HLB and the Commonwealth Bank, I welcome you to our ENFP briefing, Leading Through COVID-19. Today, we have brought together 4 prominent leaders in the sector, and I would like to introduce our panel to you. Nirmal Hansra, Chair of both Campbell Page and Link Housing, and Director of Children's Tumour Foundation of Australia. Campbell Page provides employment and community services to most disadvantaged in our community. Link Housing is a Tier 1 community housing provider. Children's Tumour Foundation is a charity that funds research and provides support services to families affected by NF. John Hutcheson, CEO, Legacy Club Services and Director of RSL New South Wales. Legacy provides counselling, pensions advocacy, welfare support, financial assistance and social support to Legacy beneficiaries. Katherine Raskob, CEO Fundraising Institute Australia, is a national peak body representing professional fundraising. And Ollie Parker, CFO Sylvanvale, provides independent living, work-ready and life skills, inclusive childcare and youth services such as therapy, after-school care programs and vacation care, social and community programs, individual and family support, and social enterprise initiatives. I encourage you to enter your questions into the Q&A box, and the panel will be very happy to answer those at the end of their presentation. So let's get started to our panel. My first question will be directed to each of our panellists, and I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and then what has been the overall impact of COVID-19 on your organisation. So Nirmal, I thought we would start with you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and I would like to thank HLB Man Judd for arranging this particular seminar. I think it's a topic that is front of mind in all boards and executive teams. I thought I'll share the experiences on 3 of the organizations that you mentioned because there have been quite different impacts through COVID. Let's start with Campbell Page. Campbell Page's mission is very simple. We help people find jobs and build communities. Our key objective is we want to transform people's lives through employment. We deal with, effectively you use the word disadvantaged. It's interesting. We use that internally, but we do not use it externally because our customers do not see themselves as being disadvantaged. And really the people we're dealing with are people with disability, Indigenous communities, single parents, people on drugs and alcohol, people affected with domestic violence, homeless. So in other words, very difficult cases of people in our community. We also provide community services. Actually, Campbell Page started out as a youth refuge center down the South Coast. And we run a number of Indigenous education and preschool programs in Mogo that you might have heard of, Mogo with the bushfires. We operate across the Eastern Board from Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. We've got about 80 sites that we operate and about 300 staff. Now, on the impact of COVID, we had our baptism, I guess, on crisis management with the bushfires back in January. And therefore, our experiences with that did help us when it came to COVID because we were manning the emergency relief centers down the South Coast because the fires were from Wollongong all the way to Eden. So we're in the thick and thin during that period. And effectively, that emergency relief team framework was used by the executive management to drive the whole response when we came to COVID, and the board worked effectively with management in the process. Now, what were some of the key impacts for us? Well, the first thing, I guess, was how do you mobilize a whole team of 300 people who have traditionally worked in offices to now work from home? So all the issues associated with just mobilizing that stuff. With the bushfires and then carrying on with COVID, it really affected our income for the second half of the year. Now, let me explain a bit about how it affects us, because we as an organization get paid for the services in terms of outcomes. So we have to see people, meet them, provide them various services, and then effectively get paid for outcome. Now, the government made the decision because of COVID that job seekers do not need to go and see the providers and therefore have that engagement in order to get any benefits. So here's a business which is there to provide services in terms of training, assessment and employment, and gets paid on outcome. But in fact, there's going to be no obligation on that person to do anything. Now, clearly, JobKeeper and the stimulus package did help to cushion the impact on the organization. The way we delivered our services, it's very much a one-to-one, face-to-face, communication and appointments that you do to deliver. So we've always had a call center as part of our service delivery. So we were able to use that sort of framework to provide those services. We've got a very significant Victorian presence, and with the lockdown that we have right now, obviously the whole issue about well-being, of staff is a matter of concern, and we are trying. With that all said and done, I'm very pleased to report that there were no retrenchments in the organizations and no COVID cases in any of our organizations. Let me talk about then Link Housing. Again, Link Housing's mission is very simple. We enhance people's lives through housing. So we are a provider of social and affordable housing in Sydney. And effectively, we extend from the city of Sydney all the way to Barara to Hunters Hill. That's our patch. And we have got 2 offices with about 100 staff. Now, the impact, I guess, from COVID standpoint has been one where our tenants that we have, who are customers, effectively, it meant that we had to forego any rental reviews. We had to be very empathetic, empathize with the fact that we have people losing their jobs and things like that. And therefore, there's a higher level of rental arrears and potential bad debts, if you will. We did not qualify for JobKeeper, because for our business, we did not have a reduction in income of 15%. And effectively, the executive team made a decision to forego any salary adjustment for the full financial year. And the services that we were delivering, again, was done via phone, SMSs, and the like. And again, I'm very pleased to report there's been no retrenchments and no COVID cases in our offices. Now we get to the charity, the Children's Tumor Foundation. It's a very small organization with a team of 7 people. And what we do is we actually raise money to fund research and support services. We are one of 3 in the world that actually undertake clinical work through our hospitals and deliver services to families that are affected by this disease. So for a very small organization, we used to have on average, donation of about $1.2, $1.3 million a year. And yet we are out there in terms of, funding research done at Royal North Shore Hospital, in Sydney, Westmead Children's Hospital, the Murdoch Children's Institute of Victoria, and the Royal Melbourne Hospital. One of the, obviously as a charity, the main activity we have is fundraising. And one of our major fundraising events was actually the Cupid's Undie Run, which is held around Valentine's Day every year in February, March. And we raised about $500,000 through that event. And we had to make, sort of a decision as to whether we would be prepared to take the risk that's associated with running such a fun event, And effectively, before the government made it mandatory, we had decided as a board that we could not take that risk, and with all the social distancing, to actually cancel that event and convert that into a virtual event. So we were affected by the bushfires that came because, you know, we were not able to raise the sort of money during the Christmas appeal, because a lot of money went to, you know, bushfire appeals, as you know. And for an organization that is very small, that has got a significant number of volunteers that do work to raise money, became a serious challenge for us. We then sort of, you know, and when it came to the June appeal, because of the nature of the market environment that we operate, and the number of our major donors said that, look, we've got serious challenges because of our investment portfolios, that we will not be able to fund you either this year or we'll have to defer. So we had to take some very hard decisions as a board in terms of how do we survive as an organization with, you know, significant amount of commitments for research and support services over there for an organization that's relatively small. So we had to take the difficult task of having to go and terminate some 30% of the staff and really sort of position ourselves whereby we will continue to provide the support, the research funds that we are committed to for the next 12 months to the respective hospitals, to continue supporting the families by the frontline support services people, and anything that had to do with back office, etc., and the like had to go. And the directors actually had to take on the role of being responsible for some of the executive management that was required out there. We have done some various amounts of cost savings that we could do. For example, all of the staff are working from home, so we've gone out of our real estate presence. And effectively, we are running down our cash reserves for the next 12 months in the hope that within 12 months that things will improve, and that perhaps, you know, how we go about fundraising from the traditional sense of field-based sort of activities to become more virtual-based and use digital technology as a platform. So that is a summation, I thought, in terms of how 3 different boards with 3 different scenarios were impacted by COVID.
Thank you, Nirmal. That's fantastic. And John, over to you.
Thanks very much, Kim, and thanks very much to HBM and Judd, because I think this is a great forum for practitioners, CEOs, chairs and so forth, just to be able to share ideas in this space here. As you know, Legacy is a large organisation. It's about 46 separate entities on a national basis. Legacy Club Services is simply a service delivery company to 6 of those particular entities, and sort of represents about 20% of the client base on a national perspective as such. And as Kim, as you touched upon, we provide really counselling services, pension support, welfare support to the families of veterans that have actually died or been physically incapacitated or dealing with mental health issues post their particular service. I've been the CEO now for approximately 5 years. Prior to that, I served in the Australian Army for about 32 years. So for me, running the organisation is very personal. I guess the impact of COVID on all of us was the fact that we thought we had a business continuity plan in place and that we'd practiced the business continuity plan, but none of us had actually done that. And so then all of a sudden, virtually overnight, we had to bring out the business continuity plan to be able to support our support to our beneficiaries. And what I have noticed, I think over the last 5 months really since it's been going, is it has had an impact on our service delivery model itself. Our service delivery model is primarily about providing financial and welfare support, but it's also about social inclusion, which really revolves around your beneficiaries going on holidays, having meetups and all those sort of activities in place. So we've had to really adapt to that particular environment. One of the ones I enjoy talking to people about was we look after a number of individuals with disabilities, and each month we would normally take them out for an adventure, whether it was to go on the harbour or whether it's to go and visit the fire station and so on like that, just to have a regular activity every month. We now have a Zumba session each month that they all participate in and get the chance to be able to talk to each other. And I think the reason why I raised that as an example is that I found it was my junior staff. If you engaged with your junior staff and asked for ideas about how to deliver the same effect, it was interesting to see the ideas that they came up with, and we could put that into place. I think that was sort of flowing from there. I think the second observation I'd make would be the increase in the pace and magnitude of change. Example would be is that I think we had all been discussing about how we were going to move into a cashless society, and that we'd have this slow incremental model to come down. But in theory, what's happened is that 10 years of change has been squeezed into 3 months, which means as organisations, particularly the not-for-profit sector, we've needed to adapt very quickly to a cashless society. And when we do come out of this particular journey, I doubt very rarely that anyone will be carrying any cash for any sort of tin rattling sort of fundraising exercise itself. So you've had to adapt very quickly into that and to move into that environment. There will always be slight barriers. And one of the things I tend to find is that you still have a lot of particular mindsets about the old way of doing business, that we can just simply readjust it, which is not really happening. And also the same as you suddenly realise that maybe your organisation was quite bureaucratic. Maybe you had all these processes in place, you had to fill all these forms in, and suddenly, because you're not in the office, you don't get that face-to-face sort of time. So it does give the opportunity to say, well, really, there's a whole series of steps in this process we don't need to do in the future itself. So it really comes back to that increase in the pace and magnitude of change and gives you that litmus test there. I'm sure we'll talk about later on about the reduced face-to-face fundraising revenue. For something like Legacy, that represented 35% of my revenue streams. So I have had to work very quickly to try and diversify the revenue streams. I always knew I had to. I knew about 2 years ago, I knew I had to, but I still had my traditional Legacy week, which everyone knows about, and that would raise me roughly about $1 million in the Sydney metropolitan area over that week. I can't do that this year. You know, so all of a sudden I've had a massive hit on the face-to-face fundraising, so we'll need to adapt in that, that particular space as well. And the final point I want to really raise is looking at organisational structures. These moments give you the chance to really look at the organisational structure. As Nirmal said, look at the work from home, look at what the environment's going to be looking like when you come back, how you're going to manage your staff, how much of a physical footprint do you have to have. One of the things I found in my organisation was over the last 2 years, we have been empowering the staff and giving them the tools, whether it's Surface Pros or laptops, mobile phones. So on the 26th of March, when I made the decision we would all work from home, people literally lifted the office up and went home. So it's about how do we support them and empower them to be able to work in that environment itself and know how they're feeling about it. I think the second part about any sort of organisational review is that I was very focused on the fact that we do have some reserves and that we weren't going to let any staff go over this period of time, because my belief is that all organisations have an opportunity now to build an organisational culture based upon the value sets of the organisation. So all those values we've espoused, we can do that when we start to put together working with our staff about what we look like in the future and simply indicate to them, they're coming, all of them are coming along with us on that particular journey itself. So I think you'll get a lot more buy-in to the organisation, and that loyalty bond between staff and employer will be reinforced if you stick to your guns through this period. Noting, of course, we just don't know when it's going to end at that point as such. But I think when you have reserves, it does give you the ability to be able to do that. Whereas I know, unfortunately, a lot of not-for-profits don't have those particular reserves itself from there. And the final point on staff is, I think we'd all have noticed that our staff are now working with an uncertain change very much at the back of their mind, worried about employment, worried about being able to provide effective service delivery and so on. And what you tend to find is they're working too much. And my biggest fear is they'll burn themselves out if they keep doing that. And it's a simple way to monitor when emails come in, what time the staff member sent that particular email to you. So I think we have to, and what we're trying to do very much in Legacy is the next phase we're moving into is to teach our managers and team leaders tools to be able to monitor and manage the quality of the outcomes, but also assist the staff in managing how much time we expect them to achieve those outcomes as such. So Kim, I'll leave it at that, if that's okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Over to Katherine.
Thanks, Kim. Glad to be part of the panel. Really great topic of discussion. So for those of you who are not familiar with Fundraising Institute Australia, as Kim said, we're the national peak body representing professional fundraising. So really our members are charities of all types and sizes that fundraise. And we also have professional fundraisers in their own right and suppliers and consultants to the fundraising sector as members. So really our remit is to serve our members in terms of their professional fundraising activities. And as Nirmal had mentioned, off the back of a really significant bushfire emergency and even droughts earlier, the 6 months preceding the impact of COVID were really significant for our members, for charities who were in the midst of raising more than $500 million in funds for bushfire emergencies and related emergencies, and also considering if they weren't directly responding to bushfires, how they could continue to raise funds for the causes that were still in need. You know, there was still cancer, you know, to have to, problems to solve in other areas. So that was a really challenging time for charities, and FIA's role is really to support them and help them. So we undertook some research with some sector suppliers to get a feel in March for how fundraisers were thinking about the challenges ahead. And you know, they were really pessimistic. More than 25, of all the charities, they felt that around 25% of their revenue was going to be in jeopardy as a result of the impacts of COVID-19, some of which have been mentioned here, which is an inability to deliver face-to-face events. For many organizations, we know that the bulk of their fundraising revenue comes from physical event activity. John mentioned face-to-face fundraising. You know, obviously with social distancing, we weren't able to go ahead with that. So many impacts on regular fundraising channels make it, you know, really challenging, I think, for charities to see a future which is different from what they're used to. And then at the same time, the need for their services is even greater. So that has been quite a challenge. Now, I think over the last couple of months, the same group of consultants have done this benchmarking study amongst the charities every month. And I think the extreme pessimism has given way to slightly more optimism, in the sense that the months between March and June have been up and down. So in some areas, while events have still taken a huge hit and face-to-face fundraising, corporate sponsors have come up a little bit, you know, and have been a bit stronger. They understand the needs and the requirements. The pivot to more direct and digital online marketing has made some success. I think the tax appeals, Australians are incredibly generous, and tax appeals have gone really well for many of our members. So they're feeling that potentially things aren't quite as dire. And of course, a lot of them are taking advantage of JobKeeper. So even though initially in March they thought potentially they would have to stand down scores of staff, there hasn't been the initial like huge impact on staff because of JobKeeper, at least till the end of September. So I think what we're saying now from members is that real consideration about how to adapt and change, you know, some of which John and Nirmal have discussed as well, in a new way. So what does it look like now to raise funds, to tell our story, to make sure we're capturing the attention and the imagination of Australians in terms of their generous donations, to continue that spirit of giving for the rest of the year and into next year as well. The recent report, I think in April, by JB Weir, the wealth management company, have predicted a 7.1% decrease in charitable funds this year, about 11.9 next year. So back down to about 2012 levels of giving. That's worrying, because obviously the needs are even greater than ever before. So, you know, our members are starting to think about what does it look like for this year and next? What are the ways that we can change and adapt? What are the technologies that we need to use to be able to do that? And how can we continue to engage donors in the activity? And I've seen some incredible, I hate using the word pivot because that's, you know, and I did actually look up in the synonym dictionary to find another word, but I couldn't, nothing really works. But certainly changing and adapting to new ways of delivering events. I've seen lots of organizations, you know, like the Legacies of the world, thinking about, okay, go from face-to-face to digital, and then how can it work in a really engaging way? Some charities are using their face-to-face fundraising teams in their own offices to actually ring up donors and beneficiaries, just asking how they are. And explaining the impact that they're having and what they're doing, and so check-in calls, thinking about different ways of using staff to accommodate some of the donor journeys and relationships that can occur even if they're not asking for further funds. You know, incredible events that, you know, that have made significantly more than previous years. So MS Research had the Kiss MS Goodbye campaign, which raised, I think, they were planning about 2 million, and I think to date it's raised more than 6 million. So it's really incredible what charities with such clever and smart fundraisers and leaders can do to change and adapt in this time, and that's what we're starting to see. So as a result, as I said, I think there's a slightly more, less pessimistic view from our members, that if they continue in this way and continue to adapt and change, they might be able to, you know, grow with this new world order. But make no mistake, if the rest of this year and next year does show a significant decrease, as JB Weir and some of the other studies, you know, that have been out there have suggested, it's going to be a very challenging time for them.
Thank you, Katherine. And over to you, Ollie.
Thank you, and I appreciate the ability to come onto the panel and have a discussion, because I agree it's a very topical subject and something that we're discussing internally and externally very often. Sylvanvale, for those that aren't aware, are a Sydney-based not-for-profit that we support over 750 children and adults that live with disability, and we support them to participate in the community in which they live. So a large portion of that is a supported independent living arrangement, whereby we have homes that we support our customers to live within, and then we have a number of other businesses that support that ability for those customers and other customers to do things like a day program, crafts and other activities. So I joined the organisation mid-March, had about 3 days of physically shaking people's hand around the office before everything turned and we were into crisis mode. So quite an interesting time to join any organisation, but it was certainly an eye-opening one. And I guess what I learnt was the resilience and flexibility of the staff. I think we've all talked and touched on the impacts of the previous natural disasters and how that impacted the businesses. And we too had that experience with bushfires and flooding, etc. And I think the difference here was the sustained continued pressure. So we're used to this elastic nature of bending and going, wow, this is hard, but we'll flip back in a couple of weeks back to norm. And we're not seeing that at the moment. So those challenges have been really hard. We went into lockdown, similar to sort of aged care with our homes initially. So we closed down a lot of those abilities for our customers to participate in their communities physically. A lot of our houses are of aged nature. We've been around since 1947, so some of our properties are quite old, and we don't have the IT infrastructure. We don't have, in some of our houses, we had ADSL still, and certainly not Wi-Fi throughout the house. So we've had to move very quickly in a digital transformation landscape. And also being sensitive to not having third-party contractors coming into a closed-off environment in order to provide and adapt to a service provision which we hadn't had to do previously. We were very much face-to-face, and such is the nature of our business. We had to make some difficult decisions in consolidating our business into core function. We did that fairly early on with approval of the board, but they were very strong and adamant in holding on to our employees and having a firm line as far as protection of our customers being the number one thing. So we're equally pleased to report no terminations and no COVID cases during the period. And I guess that is due to the stand-up of regular catch-ups, cross-functional working, sharing of information, having regular, we were daily meetings with all the exec and operational leaders throughout the business, and really sort of going to task. We've peeled that back slightly, but we continue to do it a couple of times a week, and we discuss things like external and internal impacts. And I think that's a way where we're really keeping on top of what's happening in the broader community and how we can reopen and re-energise our business. And that's certainly the biggest challenge we're facing at the moment, is the right time to reopen in a safe way, and whilst protecting our customers in this time.
Thank you so much. And how comprehensive is that, to be able to hear from a chair, 2 CEOs and a CFO? I thank you so much for your time and sharing all of that with us. So Reset 2020 National Impact and Need Research Study found that while the impact on the financial position of many in the sector has been serious, respondents report that the greatest impact has been the inability to provide their usual services to the communities they serve. John, in terms of legacy, what services have been affected?
I think, as I talked about initially, is that it's really our social inclusion services. which are the regular meetings we would have with our older widows. They would come to morning teas about once every 2 or 3 weeks, to share experiences, but also allowed our community service workers the opportunity to be able to provide whatever support they could. And it tended to be a good sort of session where you get ideas out of that. The same with our people with disability, having a regular monthly activity which they got used to so they could catch up with their other friends. At the same time, allow the staff to just be able to monitor simple things such as their health and hygiene and other elements that were there. And we had in place a very strong holiday program which would allow our beneficiaries to be able to get away from the day-to-day sort of rat race here and be able to go down to Moss Vale or up and down the coast and so on like that. That would be right across the range, whether it was widows or younger families. So I guess that key point about being able to socialise is what has been impacted on from a service delivery perspective. I mentioned before that some of the ways we are trying to counter that is through using the virtual environment, whether it's using Zoom. I mentioned the idea about the Zoom Zumba. Our widows have a virtual wine drinking session. Well, I don't know if it's a complete session, but it's an activity which they can then chat to each other, but it's through the virtual environment. And also a lot of the paperwork that we've actually been dealing with has been brought onto online. To be able to support that, however, we've had to put into place what I call a number of training support modules. So making a number of YouTube videos, doing training manuals or whatever that, to be able to potentially educate and develop the skills that our older ladies may have, but particularly our beneficiaries, to be able to be engaged in that perspective as well. It's the same when talking about the staff as well, developing those training packages, and also for our volunteers to make sure our volunteers remain engaged. I think like for all not-for-profits, we have a really good volunteer army, if I use that phrase, supporting us, and they just want to do something, but they can't do something. So it's really putting in place some strategies to keep them engaged with the organisation and feel as though, A, they're contributing, but they're still part of the family and will be there when you come out the other end. What I'm noticing from that is you're starting to develop a lot more closer bonds between your staff and your beneficiaries because they're making much more contact, whether it's through the virtual or through telephone calls at the same time. So I think that's a good couple of principles which we'll put into place once we come through this particular journey itself. But it was really the social inclusion activities, as we can imagine, which are very important, particularly for our widows, our older widows, who are what I call geographically dislocated. In other words, their family isn't here in Sydney, so therefore they've got no one to really catch up with. And this was a big time for them as well at the same time.
And I must say, John, that every year, for the past number of years, HLB Man Judd has worked with Legacy in terms of the wonderful Young Widows Christmas event, where we've had wonderful entertainers from Elvis Presley through to our Zumba last year, and we'll certainly miss that. There's nothing like having 100-odd women in our boardroom eating and drinking and just enjoying each other's company and reminiscing about the times that they had, and the husbands and the family that they lost. It's wonderful for us, as a firm.
And I think the great thing about those activities, they actually don't cost you a lot financially, but they're actually very rewarding for your beneficiaries in that space, yeah. No,
it's wonderful. I'm going to go to our next question because I'm just very conscious of how the time is going. But Katherine, as CEO of FIA, can you share what you're hearing from your members with regards to fundraising and how they have, sorry for the word, pivoted to adapt to the pandemic? But maybe, I know that you've touched on that. You've touched on some of the activities that have worked and, what hasn't worked. But then in terms of, say, the future of fundraising and the effects of the cashless society, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think amongst many of the channels where cash has been quite important, we will see quite an impact, and it does require that sort of approach to it, a more of a digital transformation. And we have been talking to our members for quite a while about embracing new technologies to be able to do this. I think the challenge they're facing is, in light of the impact of COVID, potential reduced income, fundraising income, they don't actually have the reserves to invest in the kinds of technology that would get them to the next level. And I think, the Australian public, as generous as they are also quite demanding of charities that they don't spend a lot of money on sort of administrative functions that can actually assist them to be better able to meet the demands of, the newer digital environment that we're operating in. So I think a lot of them haven't made the investments certainly our larger members have made those, and they're being very successful with those, you know, with really sophisticated connected up CRM systems that are able to take donors on journeys, and where segmentation and really, you know, really good solid marketing is so critical. But for others, that's going to be very challenging. So I think they're sort of caught, aren't they, in this, they want to be able to make the investments they need to meet the new, I think John said, you know, we've gone from like a 10-year thing into like a smushed up 6 months of how do we adapt to this quite quickly. But not actually having the funds to be able to do that. So I think that's the challenge and the tension that they're feeling, and where they're able to skirt around the edges with technologies that are relatively inexpensive, like Zoom, you know, telehealth, hosting events in different online environments. I think that has been working, but I think it will be a challenge for them. And they're saying to us they would love some help, either from government in the form of low interest or no interest loans or grants, to be able to do that. So definitely a knowledge that they need to. A bit of a conflict about how they're actually going to be able to fund that. And then, you know, thinking again about what are the new ways that we could use technology that will help to make donors feel comfortable in terms of giving. And we are seeing some interesting technology from companies, wearable technology, for example. And I saw an example actually in Europe of Salvation, I think it was a Salvation Army door knocker. They'd actually had this 2-meter long red carpet. They knocked on the door, stepped back 2 meters, rolled up the carpet, and then passed over an iPad, which was sanitized, to be able to collect a donation. And I think, you know, we're starting to see some really interesting, from around the world and in Australia, technologies that can help to embrace within a donor engagement interaction the possibility of donations in different ways than just cash. And I think if we can continue on that bent and try and help charities to either invest or prioritize to make the investments in these kinds of technologies to help assist us, that would make a huge difference.
So Ollie, just carrying on from that then, so what do you see the role that innovation will play and the importance of an organisation being agile and swift to adopting to new technologies?
Yes, I think we've seen that, and we've had to act with speed into a technology, particularly with connectivity. When we talk about connecting our customers into the community in which they live, and then we close the doors and with withholding their access to that community, we had to move very quickly in order to, one, come up with ideas to do within the house. So where our customers would normally go out during the day to daytime activity, we had to then provide some activities for them to do in their house, and to bring them their support, whether it's family or friends, into the house for some connectivity, which previously was always a face-to-face type thing. So we had to adapt very quickly, utilising technology such as Zoom. We did that. We rolled it out sort of corporately first, stood up some very quick. We've got the last couple of cameras, I think, in Sydney, and stuck them in the boardroom and a couple of meeting rooms so that we could participate in some of these communications, because we hadn't previously explored them. Prior to that, sending all our staff home to work from home, we then sort of further tested that Zoom effect. And then at the front line, it was all about how do we get iPads in the hands of our support workers so that they could then connect families in to have those conversations and check in on their loved ones, where we had locked those doors for their own safety. And I guess we then continue to evolve and look at new solutions that harness this technology that we've brought in. One of the real winners, which we weren't expecting, is a facilitated mothers group for mothers with children suffering with some disabilities. Not a program we would have taken on virtually prior to COVID, but one that is that the feedback has been overwhelmingly successful, because as anyone that's gone to one of those parents groups, getting your kids in the car and getting off to a 9 a.m. Coffee date, it has its own challenges with a newborn. So the fact that we facilitated that over the digital platform was incredibly successful, and as I say, a surprise to everyone involved. So we have seen pockets of this innovation popping up, and I guess we'll continue to roll that out as we don't see the vaccine coming anytime soon, and we need to just sort of almost rush to market with some new products.
So Nirmal, this one's for you. Unfortunately, fraud and cybersecurity attacks are on the increase. How are you empowering your teams to review and implement preventative strategies? Do you have a cyber and risk plan in place? And the second part of that is to your role as chair and executive director on the board, is what do you think, what is the board's role in cybersecurity?
Well, one of the key responsibilities, of a board is to ensure that we do have a robust risk management framework. It goes with the job. And I think, in each of our respective organizations, given that we are in the not-for-profit sector, we do have data with respect to our customers and all the privacy issue that goes with it. It therefore becomes a very critical piece of work that has to be done by management to ensure that we do have adequate security associated with our IT systems and databases. And I think Australia generally has come a long way on that front. And I think, in most of the boards through the Audit and Risk Committee, we make sure that cybersecurity, for example, is key as part of the reporting as to whether there have been any breaches in terms of, issues out there as such. I think it depends on the sophistication of the organization on its technology platform. Across the 3 boards that I'm on, we made the investment a few years ago by going to cloud-based, using laptops, and therefore for us to transition of people working from home was fairly seamless. The only issue we had was probably the webcams. So we had to procure those and send them out to various people to enable to have, whether it be Zoom or team meetings and the like. So I think, cyber has always been, with all the incidences of hacking and the like. And I think as a not-for-profit, where you do have databases on donors, on customers that you deal with, it is paramount for the board to ensure that management has got that, and it has got that oversight.
Absolutely. Did anyone else want to comment on that?
I think this period of time does test us, and I'll use my legacy as an example here that, once again, we have a very robust risk management plan, mitigation strategies across the board, and we've been through that exercise of checking up on each of those. But I'd have to say that over this period of time, it's made me really have a close look at the cyber security aspect about it. We had 1 or 2 instances. One would be is just prior to the end of the tax year, our online donation system went down for 3 days, literally like 3 days before the end of the tax year. Now, we don't know whether that was a cyber attack, but it sort of made us stop and go, oh, crikey, we need to go back and really look at the business processes we have in place to be able to manage the data we have and the privacy issues with the data. It's also now forced us to go down the path of realising that whole business of moving the business to the cloud has to happen now. We can't keep pushing it every year down because it's a bit too expensive. It has to happen now. So for me, the interesting about it is we talked a lot about the cyber security, but I think I would be honest in saying that we found that a couple of times that the plan we had in place and our mechanisms were actually quite weak when we did a review of them.
Okay. So you've all touched on this, and I think this is one of the most significant issues, is people's well-being. Who is looking out for our leaders? And I must say that each time that I see Daniel Andrews' face or those of the chief medical officers, I personally feel so much empathy and really unsure how long they can keep going. This is consistent, this is every day. So in terms of that, what mechanisms have you put in place to identify and support mental health issues? And I'm going to just go back to you, John, because I know that you have worked on this piece. So I'll direct that to you at this point.
Thanks very much, Kim. I guess the key point from a staff wellbeing perspective, one of the things I'm very clearly focused on is that the team leaders remain engaged with their staff on a daily basis at the lowest level. And I think by doing so, as a leader, particularly even if it's a small organisation, you're sort of dissipating that responsibility down to that particular level. Another technique I used right from the start is that I actually ring every single staff member at least once a month. so that I can visualize what their home office looks like. And you find very much that you learn a lot more about staff in that particular perspective there. The same as simple things like, at the moment, when you think about it, when you're doing a virtual meeting with someone, they have physically invited you into their house. So I think as a leader, what you have to also demonstrate is the empathy and vulnerability that you have, and that you're making decisions based upon values. Having said all that, one of the things I would say now is, after about 5 months, I'm realising that those techniques are great, but we maybe need to formalise what is a wellbeing program we put into place. And one of the ideas I'm going to tease out with my senior leadership team over the month of September is let's look at what providers actually provide wellbeing support in the locations where our staff actually live. So it might be a situation where you're engaging 2 or 3 different providers or mechanisms, but it's close to them and they can get that aspect there, and maybe they can also meet up with the staff and that element. But coming back to your key question about Dan Andrews, and I think, you know, he's doing a fantastic job. As such, as a leader, you're always the face of the organisation, but you have to share it across your management team and get your management team more involved in order to be able to share that decision making, which allows you to assist with your own well-being. And the final point I'd make is that we often travel to and from work, and we used to use that as thinking time. Now we're sitting at home and we're using thinking time to work. So I think as a leader, it's important to put into your calendar that hour I used to travel to work is now going to be me time, thinking time. And the same as that hour when I'm coming home at the end of the day, which allows you to start the day and decompress at the end of the day itself. And the final point about vulnerability is also talking with your senior leadership team and just telling them when the pressure's just a bit too much or whatever, that they need to assist you in that space.
I think it's really important that when you do meet with your teams, that, you know, the camera is on. You need to see them. You need to see the behaviours. You need to see the looks on their faces, and, you know, get a better gauge for how they're coping, because that's, you know, everyone copes very differently. So at HLB, I just wanted to just in terms of what we've done here, we obviously had implemented an EAP program many years ago, but since COVID-19, and I just want to share this with you because I think that our HR team has just done an incredible job. So over this month, we've got guided meditation, virtual boot camp, mental health workshops, and yoga. You know, it's just amazing the work, the extra work that the HR teams are putting in. And I think they should be acknowledged. I think that, you know, I think management is doing an incredible job. I think HR teams are doing a great job. I think everyone's doing a great job. But as leaders, the 4 of you in the sector, I hope that someone is checking in on you. This is not an easy time to lead and to be a leader. And I'm just going to make it my mission that I will call you once a week to make sure that someone has checked in on you and you're still looking as good as what you are today. Look, our last question, I think that, you know, we'll wrap up on this one because I'll ask everyone to comment on this. But this is going to be about the new norm. You know, what is the new norm? What do you see as the most significant change to your organisation going forward? And look, we'll start with you, Nirmal.
Yeah, look, I think we've done quite a few surveys within the staff and across the 2 larger organizations that I chair. And quite clearly, the feedback we're getting is a lot of them would prefer the flexibility of being able to work from home. And therefore, you got a scenario, and they're averaging around 60 to 70% of your total staff who have that preference. So the thing then becomes one of how do you go and make sure that, you know, the 60 to 70%, you know, their well-being, they're working from home and things like that. And then what about the 30% who say they need to come to the office for various reasons and to ensure their safety, you know, and the work that they do. I think this whole issue of COVID-19 from a board perspective has been one where, you know, all of us have been talking about our values, but I think this has been a good exercise in actually showing how our values are manifested in the way we conducted ourselves. And I think it's been great to get the feedback from staff and management, really, that look, what we have done, the actions we have taken, whether it be HR to do with, you know, various types of programs, EAPs and the like, the ability to go and, you know, have IT systems and things like that, the trivia nights that they now have formed, the close groups like Yammer that they have started doing, the fact that the background is not like what you and I have here, but they actually got nice corporately branded sort of background. So these are things that really shows what your actual values are. And that's been important. I think the whole issue about using the platform of virtual meetings, I think there's been a lot of feedback out there with respect to how we use that platform, you know, and the responsibilities for both the manager and staff. I think it's important. I think the other bit, I guess, is really that the whole process has highlighted some of the key skills that you may have never thought you had in the organization, both people and management and the like. So that's been quite a bit of learnings out there. And I think it's becoming clear now that where we used to do annual surveys about, you know, culture and things like that is probably bygone. You really need to do pulse surveys on a regular basis and provide instant feedback as to how you're going. So that, in a summary, are some of the key things that, you know, with the short time that we have, that I can say, I think would be in terms of going forward scenario that we can quite clearly see right now.
Thank you. And Ollie?
Yeah, look, I think the uncertainty at the moment is something hard to prepare for, but it's something that we all need to talk about. So regularly talking about people's how people are tracking, ensuring those catch-ups are happening with your team and their teams. And we've done things like we're exploring some partnerships with some financial institutions that have some courses on budgeting and financial stress, because that's one of the areas that I think is obviously coming up to the surface with certain people and job uncertainty. And whilst our employees don't have that pressure necessarily, the other partner in their life may do, or other financial pressures that are going on now or just long term. So just helping them with some of those tools that are available in the marketplace and just bringing them up as topics and support, yeah, just that roadmap of let's explore those suggestions that have previously been tabled and thought that were too hard, because we're in a new environment now, and we should re-explore knockdown ideas as new ideas, because the uncertainty at the moment means that certain things are working far better than we previously planned or forecast for.
Thank you. And Katherine?
I think the leadership has really changed during this time. And for me, it's been a really big challenge to go from the traditional kind of CEO leadership style, even though I feel like I'm a very modern leader. You know, it isn't, this is the way we're going to do things, team, come along and let's do them anymore, because everybody's on a different journey. And even though FIA, for example, only have a staff of 15, I've discovered, you know, in the last 6 months that every 15 of us are different in our approach, in our view, in what risk we're willing to take, how we feel about things, what our health impacts are. And so it's really difficult to have a one size fits all anymore, and difficult for the leader to say, this is what we're going to do and you've got to do it. And, you know, by God, you're lucky to be employed, so come along. And so combining a little bit of that flexibility, which the other panelists have mentioned, with the way people want to work, you know, how they want to approach their work, I think is really a critical thing in the new normal. And the other thing is that balance between productivity versus well-being. So I'm confident that my team are very productive in their work, in their homework environments, but I worry about their well-being. You know, I worry about them not being part of a team which can support each other and advance, you know, each other's sort of mental health in really productive ways when everybody's sort of scattered around. And also because we are a small organization, we don't have like HLB Manjad do like a HR team, or we also have turn taking for telephones and emails and things. I don't have one dedicated person. So that means that everybody sort of has to share the load and work in a different way. And I think those are really significant challenges for leadership in this time. And it is very difficult to focus on keeping the organization going financially, keeping it successful, thinking about how are we going to adapt and change, what are the new things we can do, while you worry about the team over here on the other side delivering. So I find that new normal is going to be very challenging for a lot of us. And just quickly to your point about checking in, I had a regular board meeting last week, and usually straight to the business, and you've got a couple of hours to get through the financials and stuff. And at the end of the meeting, one of our directors from Tasmania piped up and just said, "Katherine, how are you?" And I felt like that day when somebody asked Gladys Berejiklian in that, and you could just see the sort of the relief or the smile or something on her face that said somebody is actually asking after me. And so, Kim, I really love that idea of checking in with each other, because that's where we forget sometimes. We just keep going, and we're not being sort of true to ourselves or honest with ourselves about how we're actually doing. And people maybe aren't thinking about us that way and inquiring. So I think that's going to be important.
Fabulous. Yeah, and John?
Thanks very much. I think it's very important, as Katherine mentioned, about the checking in aspect, and as CEOs sort of sharing that. The only observation I'd make at the moment is there's been a lot of talk about all of a sudden the new norm is going to be this working from home. And all I'd simply say is we've got to guard against taking on new fads. I mean, use the example of the open planned office, which became a fad, I guess, of the 90s and the noughties and that, where we all suddenly went to open planned offices and realised, well, actually, certain roles require quiet time. They need office space in there. So what we're looking at the moment is part of our transition plan to the new norm is having potentially 4 different options based upon work from home, work with clients, work from the office, depending on what the weight of effort is in that particular role and so on. The challenge then, of course, for us will then be is how do you create a culture inside the organisation where people are willing to accept the fact that John over there is spending 90% of his time at home and only 10% in the office, whereas, Katherine over here is spending 50% in the office but 50% of her time at home, because that's what the role does as opposed to what the individual needs are. And I'm more than happy, once we've done that body of work, Kim, to share that amongst the team. The second one that comes out of that, of course, is if you do go to a virtual environment, how are you going to do the team building? What sort of aspects are there behind that? How are you going to do the innovation? I still firmly believe that you can't innovate in a virtual environment. You have to be in the same room, or at least in the same sort of team environment, to be able to just pass ideas across. See the body language of someone else there. Do they pick up my argument? Are they comfortable with my argument there? Also along the lines of compliance monitoring, is that I think in a virtual environment, your compliance monitoring will just have to step up a bit to make sure that things are getting done. And that comes back to touching upon the initial point about potential fraud, albeit we don't think it's in place, but it allows more ability to be able to do that, to look at your compliance. And the final point, I think, which is very important that we've noticed with our staff, is who has stepped up to the mark. They've always been there, but we've overlooked those particular qualities those individuals have. Certain roles that we've had inside organisations, we thought they actually had a full day's work, but really it amounts to about 4 hours a day. How do we bring that back into the new norm? And do we start to add additional tasks to that particular role there, or limit the amount of time? So then leads on to saying to yourself is, do we need to look at the character of our staff, as well as the experience and skills, but what is the character of our staff? And I think all of us that are on this particular webinar would be able to look around and say certain staff members have really stepped right into it, and really demonstrated certain skills, and other staff members potentially haven't done the same thing. So how do you look at character? How do you reward character? How do you develop character? How do you promote character in that environment? And I think that, as part of the new norm, will be one of the aspects you might now put down: experience, skills, and character. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Look, thank you to our panel. I mean, it's just been absolutely insightful, and I'm sure that everyone that has participated today will be able to go back to the office or go back to their team and just have a discussion around whether it's wellbeing, whether it was cybersecurity, whether it's delivery of services. So our next ENFP briefing, again, unfortunately and sadly, will not be face-to-face. So I think we'll be Zooming again. And look, I will send something out to everyone in terms of what they would like to hear. But I think this today, listening from 4 incredible leaders has just been fantastic. So on behalf of the ENFP, I would like to thank our panel again. And I will shortly send out to you the survey to see on the next occasion what topics you would like to hear, because obviously today, to fit everything in the hour, and look, I'm a minute over, I think we've done exceptionally well, but I have an entire, A4 sheet of paper here with just so many other topics that we can discuss. So we'll look at doing that. And I thank you all again. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.